I was blacklisted from the time I was 22.
The untold fall and rise of Lee Grant. In 1951, a young actress named Lee Grant was standing at the edge of stardom. She had just earned her first Oscar nomination for Detective Story, a dream she'd chased since childhood. But only 2 days after that success, her name appeared in a government publication. That single listing destroyed everything. Overnight, she was blacklisted. The FBI tapped her phone, tracked her steps, and made sure every move she made was under watch. Her marriage began to collapse beneath the pressure. She had to pawn her jewelry just to buy food. For 12 long years, no studio would hire her for film or television. Her yearly income fell from $75,000 to only $4,000. Lee taught acting in secret, sometimes under fake names, just to survive. When Hollywood finally opened its doors again, her youth had slipped away, but not her strength. Even at 99, she's still directing, still proving that her spirit could never be silenced. Lee Grant was born on October 31, 1925, in Manhattan. Her birth name was Leova Haskell Rosenthal. Her parents, Russian Jewish immigrants, had escaped horrifying violence in Odessa. Her mother, Witya, fled with her sister, leaving behind relatives who most likely never survived. The family settled in a small apartment on 148th Street and Riverside Drive. Her father, Abraham, worked endlessly as a realtor and teacher, trying to support them during the Great Depression. The tension inside their home ran deep. Even Abraham's own Polish Orthodox parents disapproved of his marriage to Witya, making an already fragile situation worse. Lee's actual age remained uncertain, sometimes listed as 1925, other times as 1931, a common confusion among immigrant families without solid documentation. But her talent needed no confirmation. At only 4 years old, in 1931, she stood on one of the grandest stages in the world, the Metropolitan Opera. She played the kidnapped princess in Laura Colo. Most children her age were still learning nursery rhymes, yet she was performing beside world-famous singers. That performance earned her a scholarship to the neighborhood playhouse, the very place that would mold her artistic soul. Behind the applause, though, her home life was anything but calm. Her mother had sacrificed everything for Lee's future and demanded perfection. Ballet lessons, opera rehearsals, acting classes? There was no room for play, only performance. The expectations grew heavier as Lee got older. One day, in pursuit of applause, Witya even forced her daughter to perform in blackface at school. When Lee was around 10, the unthinkable happened. Her mother's mental health completely collapsed. After a horrifying suicide attempt, it was young Lee who found her, who called for help. That haunting moment stayed with her forever. At 11, Lee reached another milestone. She was accepted into the American Ballet Theater, one of the youngest dancers ever to do so. But her success was short-lived. Her body began changing too quickly. She grew several inches in just a few months. In ballet, height can end a career, and soon she was considered too tall to partner with male dancers. The dream her family had built everything around suddenly shattered. They had little to fall back on. The Bronx apartment was cramped, and Lee practiced her routines out on the fire escape. Her father did what he could, but money was never enough. They depended on New Deal programs to survive. Some nights, Lee went to bed hungry. By 12, she had become the family's main breadwinner, acting, singing, dancing, while other kids went to school. Her paychecks kept the lights on and food on the table. That lost childhood would cast a shadow on her life forever. At 17, she reinvented herself. She changed her name to Lee Grant, determined to leave her painful past behind and step into Broadway's bright world. In 1948, she earned her first major stage role in Joy to the World. Critics were amazed, especially since she had no real stage background. But Lee knew pressure like no one else. By 16, she'd already trained under Sanford Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse, studied ballet, opera, art, and even attended Juilliard after high school. In 1949, she auditioned for Detective Story. At just 22, she shocked everyone by refusing to read for the young girl role. Instead, she asked to audition as the 40-year-old shoplifter. She created the character's voice from people she'd heard riding New York buses. Wearing an old size 18 brown jumper from another show, she brought that woman to life. That fearless choice won her the Critics' Circle Award and changed her destiny. Soon she was studying method acting under Lee Strasberg, following Stanislavski's philosophy of living truthfully in a role. In 1951, she reprised the part in the film version of Detective Story, opposite Kirk Douglas, and earned her first Academy Award nomination at only 25. That same year, she married screenwriter Arnold Manoff, who had ties to the Communist Party, something she never truly shared or understood. They'd met through his plays, and at first it seemed like love. But when actor J. Edward Bromberg died and Lee spoke passionately at his funeral, accusing the government's witch hunt of driving him to an early grave, her life changed forever. 2 days later, someone handed her a pamphlet. Her name was there. She had been marked as a communist sympathizer in red channels. She was blacklisted. At only 24, her Hollywood career was over. For the next 12 years, from 1952 to 1964, she was banned from movies and television. She refused to testify against anyone before the House Un-American Activities Committee, a decision that cost her everything she had built. Even before the blacklist, Lee had made waves on television. In 1953, she played Rose Peabody in Search for Tomorrow. Each episode ended with her possibly poisoning the soup, leaving viewers in suspense. Don Knotts even played her mute brother. But her run ended abruptly after a store owner in Syracuse mailed CBS a postcard calling her a communist. The network fired her instantly. Sponsors didn't want controversy. Her Hollywood debut in 1950 had already exposed her to the darker corners of the industry. Sexism was rampant, and the studio system was merciless. By 1930, women made up only 20% of casts, down from 40% a decade earlier. The power lay entirely in the hands of 5 major studios: Warner Brothers, Paramount, MGM, Fox, and RKO. Lee refused to compromise her dignity, even when it cost her dearly. In 1952, she won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival for Detective Story. But her triumph was buried under the shadow of the blacklist. Her name was tainted. Her opportunities gone. She couldn't defend herself. She could only wait, silently, for history to move on. During those lost years, she found small ways to survive. Tiny theater roles, secret performances under false names. Critics still noticed her talent and intensity. Even as a teenager, she had stunned audiences with raw, emotional improvisations, unpredictable, real, and unforgettable. She always chose roles that hurt, roles that meant something. When she returned to television, with the Goldbergs, more barriers awaited. She finally received equal billing with men but not equal pay. The gap was obvious, and the networks grew increasingly nervous about shows with Jewish or ethnic casts. When the Red Scare peaked, they canceled such shows without hesitation. In 1953, she joined the Broadway cast of Stalag 17. The show became famous, not just for its story, but for what went on backstage. Director Jose Ferrer was known for his temper and control. Lee, trained in method acting and fiercely independent, often clashed with him. Their heated arguments became Broadway gossip, but through it all, she proved one thing: Lee Grant would never be intimidated. She was only 23 when her world fell apart. It was April 1951. She had just been nominated for an Oscar for Detective Story alongside Kirk Douglas. Hollywood expected her to be the next big star, but before she could even attend the ceremony, her name appeared in red channels, the list of supposed communist sympathizers. The reason? Her husband, Arnold Manoff. Director Edward Dmytryk had testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee that Manoff was tied to the Communist Party. Lee refused to turn against him. She said she barely understood his politics, and that it had always been a wedge in their marriage. But none of that mattered. She was now blacklisted, one of 150 names in a government report. The consequences were swift. She had been cast in A Streetcar Named Desire, one of the decade's biggest plays, but the producers removed her overnight. Her contracts vanished without explanation. One week, she was the industry's rising star. The next, no one would take her call. Kirk Douglas later said Lee Grant had one of the most promising futures in Hollywood, and it was stolen from her in a matter of days. The FBI began its surveillance. They listened to her phone calls, followed her in public, and even kept tabs on her when she stayed home with her daughter, Dinah. She described it as living on a knife's edge, never sure who was listening, never able to relax. The fear bled into her marriage. The walls of her home felt like they had ears. Under that kind of pressure, trust crumbled. Lee said it was like trying to dance on the head of a pin, living while constantly being watched, yet never allowed to breathe. The long exile and rebirth of Lee Grant. By 1953, the storm had deepened. Both Lee and her husband, Arnold Manoff, were now entirely blacklisted. Work vanished overnight. The couple had no income, no offers, and no safety net. To survive, Arnold began writing under the alias Joel Carpenter, though the pay was pitiful. He secretly contributed scripts for You Are There, Naked City, and The Defenders. Lee, meanwhile, pawned her remaining jewelry just to buy food for their daughter, Dinah. They lived in a rundown Manhattan building shared by other blacklisted artists, clinging to each other for survival. Lee accepted tiny acting jobs under false names and taught private acting lessons for cash. The money barely covered rent. Her glory days were gone. She later called those her ingenue years, the years when her face should have been on posters, yet instead she was living in poverty. The stress soon began to affect her mind. After her testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee, something inside her broke. Her memory started failing. Sometimes she couldn't even recall the names of close friends. That mental wound never fully healed. Decades later, while writing her memoir, I Said Yes to Everything, she realized the true depth of that trauma. The blacklist hadn't just taken her career, it had rewired her brain. The fear, the silence, and the shame had left permanent scars. To keep afloat, Lee turned her small Manhattan apartment into an underground acting school. From 1951 to 1963, she taught between 15 and 20 students a week, charging $25 per session. Her very first student was Sandy Dennis, who would later go on to win an Oscar herself. Lee spoke candidly to her pupils about everything: the casting couches, the corrupt studio heads, and how the blacklist destroyed lives. Her raw honesty made her classes legendary in New York's theater circles. Even so, she earned only $300 to $400 a month, just enough to care for Dinah. Eventually, she joined HB Studio, where she worked alongside major talents like Maureen Stapleton. Her marriage finally cracked under the weight of all that suffering. By 1960, after 9 years together, Lee and Arnold separated. He had 3 children from earlier marriages: Tommy, Michael, and Eva, and Lee had joined the Communist Party only to stand by his side. But as she later discovered, Arnold had been unfaithful even when they were penniless. At one point, she was surviving on barely $1,200 a year from teaching. Their divorce was finalized in 1964. The following February, in 1965, Manoff died of a heart attack at age 50. Lee always believed the stress and humiliation of the blacklist had helped kill him. In 1961, she began therapy. Her breakdown was complete. Each session cost $45 3 times a week, nearly half her total income. Over 18 months, she spent around $3,000, a fortune for her at the time. Therapy helped her uncover painful truths: why she always said yes to powerful men, why she sought approval, and how her parents' emotional absence had shaped her. Those sessions became her lifeline, and they eventually inspired the mental health documentaries she would make years later. Even in those darkest times, she refused to stop performing. Between 1951 and 1964, Lee continued acting on stage. Actors' Equity allowed blacklisted artists to work in theater, and she survived on $55 a week, performing in plays like Arms and the Man, Wedding Breakfast, and A Hole in the Head. She performed 6 nights a week, sometimes twice a day. In 1965, her persistence paid off. She won an Obie Award for The Maids, She also deepened her craft at the Actors Studio, where she began learning the art of directing. Her theater friends stuck together. They all knew what it meant to be erased. By 1962, her income had dropped from $75,000 before the blacklist to only about $4,000. Facing eviction, she fled to Europe and accepted small TV roles in the United Kingdom and Italy, earning $500 to $800 per episode. She worked quietly, often under fake names. In 1963, she even underwent a facelift, hoping to regain a youthful look that might bring opportunities back. Yet it only made her feel more alienated, like a stranger in the very industry that once adored her. Her exile finally ended in 1964. A lawyer who owed a favor to someone inside the House Un-American Activities Committee helped clear her name. In 1965, Lee got her big break in Peyton Place, portraying Stella Chernak in 71 episodes. It was a raw, emotional role that allowed her to release all the pain she had buried for over a decade. The next year, she won an Emmy for it, becoming the only cast member to do so. When Frank Sinatra approached her at the ceremony and said, "You deserve it, kid," she finally felt safe in Hollywood again. In 1967, she starred in the Heat of the Night alongside Sidney Poitier. Her role as Mrs. Colbert carried deep emotion because she had recently lost Arnold to a heart attack. In one scene, when Poitier tells her that her husband in the film is dead, she didn't act. She truly cried. The director let the camera roll. That single take became one of the most unforgettable moments in the movie. Pure, authentic grief. Later that same year, she appeared in Valley of the Dolls as Miriam Polar, a ruthless Hollywood agent surrounded by drugs and despair. Lee brought her real-life pain to the screen, showing how ambition and cruelty often went hand in hand in that world. Critics hated the film, but audiences loved it, and her performance felt heartbreakingly genuine. In 1962, she had quietly married producer Joseph Fury. At first, the industry whispered, wondering if he too carried political baggage. But Joseph stood firmly beside her. Together, they had a daughter, Belinda. For the first time, Lee had stability and love that lasted. By 1969, her comeback was undeniable. She earned another Oscar nomination for The Landlord, where she played a racist Long Island mother. The role shocked audiences who knew her progressive values, but Lee explained that she had drawn inspiration from people in her own family, showing how prejudice hides in ordinary homes. Her fearless performance proved she wasn't afraid of uncomfortable truths. Then came March 29, 1976. Lee Grant, now 50 years old, finally won an Oscar for Shampoo. Her acceptance speech stunned everyone. "I must have really wanted this," she joked. "Otherwise, why would I wear an old wedding dress?" She had been hiding her real age for years. Even the mayor had helped her alter her birth year on her driver's license when she returned to Hollywood in 1964. Her role in Shampoo lasted just 18 minutes, one of the shortest to ever win an Academy Award, but it changed everything. She said it was the first time she felt she had no enemies left. That same year, she earned yet another Oscar nomination for Voyage of the Damned, portraying a Jewish refugee. The role was personal. Her own family had fled Odessa during the violence leading to the Holocaust. Though she appeared in only 8% of the film, her haunting performance made a lasting impression. In 1972, she had already claimed another Emmy for The Neon Ceiling. That project became a turning point. She began offering her own input on storylines and direction, causing tension on set, but also revealing her growing passion for filmmaking. It was her second Emmy win, and the spark that led her toward directing. By 1977, at age 52, Lee was still pretending to be younger to secure roles. She appeared in Airport 77 as a bitter, wealthy socialite who insulted everyone around her. Critics called her character's on-screen slap a brutal display of misogyny, a reflection of how the industry treated older women. 2 years later, in 1979, she was nominated once again for The Swarm. But this time, disaster struck. The film, made for $21 million, earned only $10 million. Critics tore it apart, calling it one of the worst movies ever made. At 53, Lee feared her career was collapsing for a second time. Instead, she reinvented herself. Refusing to fade away, she stepped behind the camera. That choice changed her life forever. In 1980, something remarkable happened. A woman who had been blacklisted, silenced, and underestimated became a trailblazer. At 55, Lee Grant directed her first feature film, Tell Me a Riddle. What made it extraordinary wasn't just the story. It was that the film was entirely written, produced, and directed by women, something America had never seen before. Starring Melvyn Douglas and Lila Kedrova, both Oscar winners, it told the quiet story of an aging Jewish couple. Lee raised over $1 million to make it, a miracle for a woman-led project in that era. The film wasn't buried. It was distributed by Filmways Pictures, screened at Cannes' Directors' Fortnight, and went on to win Best Picture and Best Actor at the Edinburgh Film Festival. For the first time, Hollywood was forced to look up and realize women could lead, direct, and succeed. Just 6 years later, Lee Grant shattered another barrier that no woman before her had crossed. In 1986, she became the first woman ever to win the Directors Guild of America Award for her CBS film, Nobody's Child. The movie told the heartbreaking real-life story of Marie Balter, a woman who had spent 2 decades trapped inside mental institutions. Marlo Thomas starred in the lead role, delivering a performance so moving it earned her an Emmy Award. The film's raw honesty about how America treated the mentally ill hit a nerve across the country. Lee's victory made national headlines, not just because she won, but because in the Guild's 51-year history, no woman had ever claimed that honor. She was 59 at the time, defying an industry that had long forgotten both women and age. But that triumph came only after years of rejection and resilience. A decade earlier, in 1975, she had stood on stage holding an Oscar for Shampoo, thinking she'd finally reached the top. Instead, she realized she was at the edge of a cliff. At 48, Hollywood had quietly decided she was too old. That night, beneath the flashing lights, she understood that time had stolen her second chance. 12 years of her youth, from 24 to 36, had already been erased by the Hollywood blacklist, and now age was threatening to do it again. In a desperate attempt to survive, she even had dinner with the mayor of Los Angeles to get 5 years erased from her driver's license. It wasn't vanity, it was survival. Refusing to fade away, she joined the Women's Directors Workshop at the American Film Institute, creating a short film where one woman speaks and another stays silent. That small project would become her lifeline, her way back, not as an actress, but as a storyteller behind the camera. By 1983, she was ready to face the world again, this time as a filmmaker. Her HBO documentary When Women Kill took audiences into real prisons, exposing the untold stories of women who had committed violent crimes. Among them was Leslie Van Houten, one of the infamous Manson family members. Through interviews and stark imagery, Lee revealed that most of these women had suffered years of abuse before they ever snapped. She didn't justify their actions, she humanized them. It was uncomfortable, groundbreaking television. 2 years later, in 1985, she pushed boundaries even further with What Sex Am I?, a bold exploration of transgender lives in America. At a time when the word transgender was barely spoken, Lee traveled across California, Texas, and New York, filming people who were simply trying to live as themselves. It was the Reagan era, a time when such stories were buried in silence. Yet her compassion and honesty turned the film into something ahead of its time. Critics said it felt like it belonged in the 21st century, not the 1980s. One reviewer even called it brutally candid. Long before Paris is Burning came out, Lee Grant had already opened that door. Then came 1986, and her courage reached a new height. She directed Down and Out in America for HBO, a raw look at the human cost of Reagan's economic policies. She captured farmers in Minnesota losing hundreds of farms each week, factory workers laid off by the thousands, families sleeping in cars. She even received death threats for exposing the truth. But her work couldn't be silenced. The film tied for Best Documentary Feature at the Oscars. marking HBO's first ever Academy Award. With that, Lee Grant made history yet again, becoming the only Oscar-winning actor to also win an Oscar for directing a documentary, a record that still stands today. Her legacy extended far beyond the big screen. Television became another field she conquered. She had already won an Emmy in 1966 for Peyton Place, and another in 1971 for The Neon Ceiling, a story about a suburban mother who walks out on her life, something TV rarely dared to show back then. Throughout the 80s and 90s, nominations kept coming, both for acting and directing. She wasn't just creating good television, she was redefining what television could mean. In 1989, she directed Battered, a chilling documentary about domestic violence. Lee spoke to both victims and their abusers, refusing to sugarcoat the pain. The film became a teaching tool across the country, in schools, in police training sessions, even among lawmakers. People magazine praised her, saying she had proven herself to be one heck of a filmmaker. That same year, Women in Film honored her with their first ever Lifetime Achievement Award. And in 1990, both New York City and Los Angeles County formally thanked her for her work. But perhaps her most jaw-dropping moment came much later, in 2023. During an interview, she casually revealed that she was 97 and a half years old, born in 1925. For decades, even her public profiles had been wrong. When the journalists didn't react enough, she jokingly told them to act surprised. The truth was, Lee had begun lying about her age back in 1964, when she came off the blacklist. She was 39, but pretended to be in her early 30s to get roles. She lied to agents, casting directors, even friends, and sometimes had to coach others to keep the lie going. It wasn't ego, it was strategy. Studies later proved that women over 50 were offered 78% fewer roles than men their age. Her 2014 memoir, I Said Yes to Everything, laid bare her journey from the blacklist years between 1952 and 1959, 64, to her rebirth as a filmmaker. She refused to testify against her husband before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and for that act of loyalty, she was erased from Hollywood. No films, no television. She taught classes, performed in theater, and her husband wrote under fake names just to survive. The trauma was so deep that afterward, she struggled to remember names or faces. It was as if her brain shut down parts of itself to protect her, but she never stopped fighting. She once said, "Living through that time was like dancing on the head of a pin." And now, as of 2025, she is 99 years old, still sharp, still radiant, still unstoppable. Turner Classic Movies is already preparing a grand tribute for her 100th birthday on October 31st. From her Broadway debut in 1951 to a career that spans over 7 decades, Lee Grant remains a living symbol of resilience. Today, she still shares her thoughts online, proudly rocking her silver hair and red lipstick. After all these years, she stands as Hollywood's oldest living director, a title she carries with the same grace, wit, and fire that got her there.